Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good wherever you are. I'm your host, That Lit Astro Chick, the channel where we discuss the natal charts of authors, artists, and anyone else that I find interesting. Today's natal chart is going to be, thankfully I got the birthday correct for this one, is going to be for Toni Morrison's birthday because her birthday is in fact today. I wanted to keep a channel where I could discuss the natal charts of authors on their specific birthdays, but doesn't look like I'm actually keeping very well with that right now. I did want to discuss Toni Morrison, specifically because she has such a pivotal voice when it comes to writing about America, not just writing about Black Americans. I know that she had an interview shortly before her death where she discussed how writing for Black people is hard, but I would actually say that she writes a lot about the state of America, the underbelly of America that doesn't oftentimes get covered when it comes to a lot of authors. The first book that I read of Toni Morrison was Paradise, and it was when I was in college. And my initial opinion on Toni Morrison, and this is just my opinion, is that she is a master at very epic themes. I really do appreciate how epic her books are, especially in terms of the scope of what they can cover, because it's not specifically character driven, but it's more about discussing a theme. That's one of the reasons as to why I said that she is one of those writers who writes a lot about America, not just about Black Americans. I really do enjoy the fact that she does discuss Black people in her books, as well as the legacy of slavery, because in the United States, we tend to gloss over it and just assume that it happened in the past and it's no longer affecting us now, even though the country that we have, we would not have it without enslavement. And I really don't appreciate trying to sweep that oppression and subjugation under the rug, especially because it still very much affects authors and Black authors in particular today, especially when it comes to the content that we're able to cover. My opinion about Morrison's work is that I do think it's very masterful. Is it my favorite work? No, I put Toni Morrison along the same bend that I do Virginia Woolf. They're both masters at epic themes, as well as managing psychic distance and stream of consciousness writing that has a way of dropping readers into the narrative and the story that they're being told. And like Virginia Woolf, I think that Toni Morrison works best when she's in shorter form. That's just my opinion. Currently, I'm reading Beloved. I'm at the middle part of it. I really do enjoy the middle part more so than I do the beginning. And that's because when it comes to my reader preferences, I find that when it's that type of stream of consciousness writing, it's very difficult to access at the beginning. But I did say that I was going to read Beloved for Black History Month. And since today is Toni Morrison's birthday, wanted to do her natal chart. So without further ado, let's get to her chart. Toni Morrison was born in Lorain, Ohio, in the United States on February 18th, 1931 at 11 a.m. Now, because I do have the birth time for her chart, I do also have her house placements as well. So I'm going to, for the most part, be talking about that. I won't really be covering any asteroids in this particular chart, mainly because I want to get a little bit faster at doing these natal charts. Now, what's interesting about Toni Morrison is that she is one of those writers that became very famous at the second half of her life. I know that because I have both a bachelor's and a master's in creative writing. The idea that contemporary writers are oftentimes sold is that unless you are able to reach the status of a celebrity, and usually by the time you're 30, so if you don't turn in anything good by the time you're 30 or maybe even 35 or even 40, if they're willing to forgive you, then that means that the work that you've turned in, it's just not going to be good. And that was a big deal for me because even though, like I said, I'm very well versed in the writing world, something that I oftentimes came up against was having to hear about how I was nowhere near as good of a writer as anybody else. So the reason why Toni Morrison's story is so meaningful to me is because she didn't publish her first book, which I believe was The Bluest Eye, until she was 42 or 43, or that was when she had her first her first book publication. It was in her 40s. And at the time, she was working at Random House as an editor. And the very first book that Toni Morrison published, it made about 2,500 copies sold. So that wasn't very much. And I really do appreciate the fact that her story is about how the second half of her life was something very glorious, and it was very beautiful. So for today's natal chart, I'm going to discuss the negatives, so the setbacks that she could have had in her life astrologically, as well as the positives for how she was able to achieve the status that she had in particular in this lifetime. So being born on February 18th, this would make Toni Morrison an Aquarius sun. And her sun is at that 29th degree. In astrology, it's also known as the anaretic degree. And the anaretic degree is going to refer to a lot of high pressure situations. Also, in this particular lifetime, she may have wrapped something up when it comes to those fifth house expressions. So, for example, dealing with men, children, investments, recreation, identity, that all has been wrapped up in her most recent lifetime, because she did pass away in 2019. So there is that one part when it comes to her sun. In terms of a setback or a challenge that she could have had, her sun is making a quincunx to her Pluto, which was in Cancer. So the Pluto in Cancer generation, we would now refer to as being the silent generation. This was a time when there was a rise in dictatorships, in fascism, as well as more of a focus in the terms of traditions, race, and family when it comes to mind. The Pluto and Cancer generation most likely had a lot of thoughts and revolutions in terms of how we think about race and how we think about lineage, because Cancer is one of those signs in the zodiac that deals with race. It's also a sign that deals with family of origin, as well as our consciousness, because the moon is in its home when it's in Cancer. So these were a lot of the thought processes that were going on with her particular generation. Now, because she does have her sun in quincunx to that Pluto in Cancer, she most likely did have to make a change in terms of her identity and the way that she thought about it. This also could have been the reason as to why she focused much more in this particular lifetime on writing about race and writing about Black people, because this was palpable in the environment in which she was born into. So that's one of the harsher aspects that she had, and perhaps maybe why it took her a little bit longer to achieve her success. Another aspect that would be working against her in this would be the fact that she has her Venus in opposition to her Mars, which is in Cancer. So Venus in Capricorn is going to refer to a love of wisdom. And this is going to be heightened because she does have her Saturn conjunct to her Venus in Capricorn as well. However, because she does have her Mars in Cancer, and her Mars in Cancer it looks like it's at the 29th degree. So Mars is actually in its detriment when it's in Cancer, because it's going to refer to more of a focus in terms of the home and putting the mental energy towards developing a home. This also could denote some type of violence that could have taken place within the home, because she does have it at that 29th degree, and it's also making a quincunx to her Aquarius sun. So I wouldn't be surprised if she did experience some bout of domestic violence within her life with this setup within her chart. And in addition to that, to go back to the Venus in opposition to her Mars, she could have been somebody who possibly had some challenges when it came to the people that she loved. Capricorn is also another one of those signs that refers to race. So she could have perhaps had more of a desire to get with someone within her own race. And I believe that she did. She was married. She was married for about 8 years, it looks like, and she had 2 kids. However, that Mars in Capricorn, it's going to refer more perhaps to a desire to an ancestral connection, or maybe there could have been violence in the home, or maybe this also could have represented an abandonment because she was divorced. And there is also the signs astrologically of her having a divorce because she does have her Venus squaring Uranus in Aries. And she had one husband, I believe his name was Toni Morrison. And in addition to one of the setbacks she could have experienced throughout her life, it was that she lost one of her sons to cancer in 2010. And this was during a time that she was working on a novel, so she had to take some time off for that. And another potential setback that she could have had astrologically within her chart is that her Pluto and her Saturn, those are both squaring her node. So when I look at natal charts for clients, haven't officially started doing them, but when I get family and friends who want me to look at their natal charts, I do like to see if there's a fixed T-square in terms of their nodes, and there is, because Toni Morrison was an Aries North node, so Libra on the South. This means that she could have potentially come from many lifetimes where she could have been married, where she could have been working with keeping a family together, because Libra is one of the signs of PR. It's also one of the signs of strategy. And in addition to that, her North node is located in her 12th house, which means that the South node is in the 6th house. So this is an opposition to Ann Petrie's natal chart. So in her past lifetimes, because the 6th house does in fact deal with servants, she could have been enslaved, and this could have been why she focused so much of her work on the mentions of race as well as in slavery. And in this particular lifetime, she was supposed to be working with somebody behind the scenes in order to garner that success. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because she does have her Pluto and her Saturn squaring her North node, and those are in opposition to each other. Pluto is a means of support, so she had to break away from the support that she was getting in terms of the status quo when it came to her sense of voice as well as what she wanted to write about. And because she also has Saturn, and her Saturn is in Capricorn and it squares her North node, potentially this could represent delays because Saturn does deal with delays. However, she would have received that success because she also had Saturn in Capricorn, and that is when it's in its home. In addition to another or a few other squares that I see, she did have her Jupiter squaring her Uranus. So this could represent sudden losses that she could have had, possibly misjudgments, especially within those risks. And I say that because her North node is conjunct to her Uranus, and that's also in Aries. So she could have been somebody to where she was very eager in this lifetime to really get the ball rolling and to be all about self, because that's what she was supposed to do first. If you have your Uranus in your South node, if it's conjunct to the South node, it could refer to potentially the many lifetimes that you came away from, and within your early lifetime, in this lifetime, that energy is going to be very heavy. However, if you have your North node conjunct to your Uranus, this means that you're going to make a lot of breaks in this lifetime because you were very eager to get started on your life purpose. But because as an Aries North node, she doesn't have as much experience with it, it could possibly mean that she could have made some judgments that may not have been in her best interest at that time. And in addition to that, another square that she has is her Saturn squares her Uranus in Aries. So this could refer to potentially projects that she could have started and then maybe stopped, maybe had a delay in the projects due to her work, or she could have had work, in fact, standing in her way. I had taken a lecture by Yadon Israel, who is now getting his shine because of the editorial work that he did on the short story collection Temple Folk. And Yadon had talked about how when Toni Morrison when she was writing her first novel, she had to work. She was an editor at Random House, and then right after work, she had to work on her novel. So it took her a little bit of time. Toni Morrison was also somebody who was always working. I don't actually believe that she got the financial security that she was looking for in life until almost close to retirement. In fact, she had gone on record and said that she had something like her retirement plan was winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Otherwise, she would not have had one, because even though as a writer, and I understand this because I am also a writer, writers, unfortunately, at this time don't get paid a lot of money. So that could be one potential way of looking at that. And I would add, because she does have her Venus in opposition to Jupiter, and Jupiter is exalted when it's in Cancer. So this is going to refer to a very strong connection that she most likely had with her ancestors. And that's also indicative of the fact that her Mars and her Jupiter are running parallel in both in Cancer. So she had a very strong ancestral connection. Right now, I'm just discussing the challenges that she had within her chart. And in addition to having her Jupiter in opposition to her Saturn, this could also indicate that maybe she may not have been as broad with her thinking, perhaps, as she could have. Although I do want to say that the Jupiter running parallel to her Mars in Cancer, this is going to represent a very strong come-up aspect within her chart. So another one I would say, to go back to some of the issues that she could have had, is the fact that her Chiron squares her Sun in Aquarius, and her Chiron's in Taurus. Chiron in Taurus is going to refer to somebody who will have struggles in their lifetime when it comes to money. The obtaining of wealth, as well as the acquisition of possessions. I think that this is represented by the fact that she did not at least get financially comfortable until the second half of her life. So now I want to discuss a little bit, because I don't want this video to be too long, some of the positives that I see within her chart that are going to point to success, but perhaps success a little bit later on in life. The first one I have is that her moon in Pisces, it trines with her Pluto. So this is going to represent the family support that she most likely received. She could have experienced her family as being a haven for her in terms of her creativity, where she could have gotten access to her compassion, and where she could have seen them as a form of salvation, and she did receive support from them during that time. In addition to that, she has her Sun running parallel to her Mercury in Aquarius, and Mercury is exalted when it's in Aquarius because it's going to refer to a very inventive way of communicating with other people, as well as communicating those ideas. And I think that this could be an example of why her work could be very broad, and maybe why she could have been more inventive in terms of that stream of consciousness, the playing around with psychodistis as she was. It could also represent an excess or a burn off of energy. I have heard this from clients, especially those who have their Sun conjunct Mercury in Aquarius, to where they will have two jobs and the jobs may not seem like they're related to each other. That could have been what would have been happening with her, especially when it came to having her Mercury running parallel to her Sun like that. Another aspect that could point to the support that she has is the fact that she does have her Mars and her Jupiter and her Pluto also conjunct in Cancer. And Pluto is going to refer to the ways in which we think and how we feel about the ways in which we are thinking. So, for example, with Toni, she has her Pluto in the third house. This means that she most likely did have a lot of intense experiences when it came to racism. She had a very quick mind. She most likely experienced something very tragic that happened within the K through 12 years. And the way that she went about processing that, the purging method, because Pluto does deal with regenerative elements, is through her writing. It also could refer to themes that could have been borrowed for her or items that people gave to her, because Pluto also deals with things that are earned. And this could be one of those aspects for her creativity, especially when it comes to her writing, as well as her ancestral connections. Another positive for her is that she does have her Jupiter in Cancer in the second house. So Jupiter in the second house is going to represent a multiplication, because Jupiter deals with things that multiply. And Jupiter in the second house is going to deal with a multiplication in terms of the wealth that she's going to receive. In addition to that, other positive aspects in her chart is the fact that her Saturn does trine with her Chiron as well as with her ascendant. So Saturn trining Chiron, meaning that she would eventually master material security over time. And Saturn trining her ascendant, meaning that it could make her someone who was very serious, but I would also say somebody to where their family connections were very meaningful to them. And in addition to that, she has her Venus trining her Neptune. So this could refer to someone who is going to have a very wide reach, especially when it comes to her creativity, because she does have her Neptune in Virgo and the fifth house of Leo, and Neptune is exalted when it's in the fifth house. So this would deal with someone who is going to be very creative, who will have a very strong spiritual aspect. In addition to that, it could represent some literary setbacks that she might have had. And I say that because she does have her sun in opposition to Neptune. So she could have been somebody who felt very insecure in terms of the ways that she expressed herself when it came to her writing. In addition to that, she does have her ninth house. So this deals with our friendship, college, higher educations, and those contain both her Venus and her Saturn, which are conjunct in Capricorn. So I know that I had said in a previous chart that she kind of gives me pick-me vibes, and I say that because the way that she writes, it's primarily about race, and she doesn't really discuss gender in her writing. And I think for one reason for that is because she does have her Venus squaring Uranus. However, one positive aspect that I see in her chart, which is similar to Percival Everett's chart, is that she has her Venus and her Saturn, and they're both conjunct. So this would give her a love of wisdom as well as a very strong work ethic. It would make somebody who would be very serious in terms of the ways that they approach their life. And because it's located within that ninth house, this does represent being very well loved, specifically among a lot of different people, because the ninth house, it does deal with travels that come in from afar. It also represents a celebrity aspect potentially within the chart. And in addition to that, her Mercury is also conjunct to her midheaven. And I also saw this aspect in Ann Petrie's chart, because I just did her chart yesterday. So this also could be representative of a literary success. And in addition to that, she does have her 11th house in Aquarius, and that contains her sun as well as her Pisces moon. So she was most likely somebody who was friends with celebrities, was an endorsement of celebrities. She had a lot of success, especially when it comes to people, as well as a reputation and a high honors, especially at the last part of her life. And then finally, she has her 12th house, and that contains her Uranus, her North Node, as well as her Chiron. So to have the North Node in the 12th house, it's going to refer to success, most likely through an occultist or a secretive practice. So she was most likely working with somebody behind the scenes when it came to achieving the success that she has. And she could have met them through a lucky break, because she does have her Uranus within that house. And this also could point to somebody who could be very eccentric from the way that they might appear. I do know that when she was interviewed by Oprah and Beloved was released, that a lot of people bought her books, and then her her book Song of Solomon was also part of the Oprah Book Club, so it did have that Midas touch. I feel like I have more that I could say about Toni Morrison, but I think that this is where I'm going to conclude the reading right here because I don't want them to be too long. Please subscribe if you get a chance, if you like more of these reading materials and the natal charts of authors, and I will catch up with you on the next video.